Happy Tuesday, everybody, and thank you very much for being here with me. Appreciate you tuning in. So I want to start off today's episode with China's property sector, and I think you already know what I'm going to say. It's not looking good. It's taking hit after hit after hit. And the latest one to China's property industry is credit ratings agency S&P Global, putting one of the country's largest property developers on a downgrade warning. The ratings agency labeled Chinese developer Vanke's credit outlook to negative. Now, previously, the real estate giant had a stable outlook. This move is adding fuel to the flame for the troubled developer because Vanke was downgraded to junk status by another ratings agency, Moody's. Vanke is one of the few remaining Chinese property developers with a positive credit rating by international firms. But it's actually precisely because of this reason that any debt repayment trouble could further decimate property market confidence in China. So circumstances appear very dire for the real estate giant because it has even caught the attention of the Chinese regime authorities. So in a very rare move, China is asking major banks to intervene in the situation. Big Chinese financial institutions are reportedly scrambling to bail out state-backed Vanke to prevent something similar from happening that resembles China's Evergrande and Country Garden, which both have defaulted on their debts and are at risk of being liquidated. Chinese state media reported that 12 major banks, including the 6 largest state-owned lenders, were in talks to provide a loan for Vanke worth as much as $11 billion. And the goal here is, of course, to help the company meet upcoming repayment deadline. Vanke's sales have collapsed in recent months, pummeled by a deterioration in demand for apartments in China's property sector, as well as the slump in home prices. Vanke's contracted sales declined 10% in 2023, and in January 2024, its sales dropped by a whopping 32%. Investors as well have been dumping Vanke's shares in the past few months. Its Hong Kong-listed stock has lost nearly 30% since November, which is very significant. Beijing has been scrambling to fix its real estate crisis since 2001, but the stimulus measures rolled out by Chinese authorities have so far failed to revive the sector. But besides property sector woes, new loans in China last month dipped more than expected. Data shows Chinese banks extended just 1.4 trillion yuan in loans in February. That is down sharply from a record high in January. Household loans, mostly mortgages, and corporate loans both dropped compared to January. Outstanding loans grew from a year earlier and stands at the lowest on record. And now let me explain why this is very troublesome for China. Reduced credit and liquidity in the economy means reduced purchasing power and investment opportunities. Credit powers businesses to expand, which then leads to more jobs and more consumption. The decline in loans will have the opposite effect. The decline in loans comes despite the central bank trying to spark the sluggish economy and fight deflationary pressures. Meanwhile, it seems like China has found new ways to hurt the United States. While the U.S. has tried to cut off China from sophisticated chip technology, China has responded by cutting itself off. Beijing is now directing domestic electric vehicle manufacturers to avoid foreign semiconductors if at all possible. And this is according to sources who spoke with Bloomberg. U.S. chipmakers like Nvidia stand to lose a major source of revenue. This is part of China's campaign to reduce dependence on Western imports and boost its own semiconductor industry. And now on to Wall Street. Main indexes closed higher yesterday with mega-cap growth stocks like Alphabet and Tesla supporting a rebound in the technology-heavy Nasdaq. And this is all while investors also waited anxiously for the U.S. Federal Reserve's meeting this week. Here's a quick recap of markets.
Wall Street's main indexes ended higher on Monday, led by mega-cap growth stocks such as Alphabet and Tesla, while investors also awaited this week's Federal Reserve policy meeting. The Dow ticked up 0.2%. The S&P 500 gained more than 0.6, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq climbed 0.8%. Google parent Alphabet gained nearly 4.5% after a media report that Apple is in talks to build Google's Gemini AI engine into the iPhone. That's a partnership investors would welcome, says Chris Carey, portfolio manager at Carnegie Investment Counsel.
Apple is one of the last major tech companies that is yet to really talk about their endeavors into the world of AI. They've been kept the details very close to their chest on this one. So I think it's very encouraging that they've chosen to partner with Google, a company that they have a long-lasting relationship with in terms of Google being the default provider for search. And so I think that this is quite encouraging to investors to see that Apple is trying to take this seriously.
In other AI news, shares of Nvidia added more than 0.5% but closed well below their session high. The world's leading AI chip maker kicked off its annual developer conference Monday, with Chief Executive Jensen Huang unveiling the new flagship AI chip, the Blackwell B200. Tesla shares finished up more than 6% after the electric car maker said it would soon increase the price of its Model Y EVs in parts of Europe. And shares of server maker Super Microcomputer, which joined the S&P 500 on Monday, gave up earlier gains to close down nearly 6.5%, making it the biggest percentage decliner on the day in the benchmark index. Its shares, however, are up roughly 280% so far this year. Investors now look to the Federal Reserve for updates on when possible rate cuts may begin, with the central bank's March policy meeting concluding on Wednesday.
Now on to Nvidia. Chief Executive Jensen Huang on Monday kicked off his company's annual developer conference with a slew of announcements designed to keep the chipmaker in a dominant position in the artificial intelligence industry. Here's more information.
Nvidia unveiled a new, speedier AI chip on Monday that may help it extend its lead in artificial intelligence.
I would like to introduce you to a very, very big GPU.
Chief Executive Jensen Huang unveiled the chip called the B200 Blackwell at the company's annual developer conference. It takes 2 squares of silicon, each the size of the company's current must-have chip, the H100, and binds them together into a single piece. Nvidia said the B200 is 30 times speedier than its previous chip at tasks like serving up answers from chatbots. But Huang did not give specific details on price or how well it performs when training those chatbots, which has generally been Nvidia's bread and butter. The company also said major customers, including Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI, are expected to use the chip for their own AI offerings. Still, the news seemed to fail to provide new fuel for a rally which has seen Nvidia soar to become the 3rd most valuable company in the U.S. over the past year, and Nvidia's stock dipped 1.4% during the keynote. What Nvidia announced Monday will help it decide whether the company can maintain its 80% share of the market for AI chips. Many analysts expect Nvidia's market share to drop several points this year as new products from competitors come to market and Nvidia's largest customers make their own chips.
And creators on YouTube will soon have to label anything that is not actually their own creation. So what I mean is the video sharing platform has rolled out new rules for AI-generated content. Users will have to disclose if their content alters a real person's actions or words or alters a real place or event. Now, if there are realistic scenes that aren't real, they have to label that as well. The platform will add a label in the description on the screen for noting that the video contains altered or synthetic content. And in a post online, YouTube said that violators could have their content removed or even be suspended from the partner platform. Now, this is how actually most creators make money from their videos, so it's very significant here. YouTube added that any content that breaks its community guidelines, labeled or not, will be removed. Meanwhile, an Arizona migrant shelter network that has housed thousands of asylum seekers plans to halt most operations in 2 weeks when funding from Washington runs out. This is a problem for towns along the border where officials fear a surge in homelessness and extra costs. Here's more on the situation.
This migrant shelter in Tucson, Arizona is one of 5 in a network in Pima County that has collectively served an estimated 180,000 asylum seekers over the last decade. But these families sleeping on cots could soon find themselves homeless once federal funds for migrant shelters run out at the end of the month. And the Casa Alitas network of shelters says it will soon be forced to halt most operations.
After March 31st, most of our funds are going to go to a cliff.
Susanna Seelig is the associate director for Casa Alitas.
My main concern after March 31st is what is going to happen to those other 960 people per day that are coming through the border. Our daily average is about 1,000 people, but we have had days like in November where we received up to 1,800 people in just one day.
At one of the Casa Alitas shelter sites last week, migrants rested on cots and received meals, clean clothes, toiletries, and assistance planning onward travel. Sarah Vasquez Gonzalez came with her husband and 3 of her 6 children from Chiapas, Mexico, where cartel violence has driven Mexican families to flee to the U.S.
Lo que vivimos allá en Chiapas no es fácil porque
what we experienced in Chiapas was not easy because 2 criminal organizations arrived and we saw shootings. My husband stayed there taking care of our things, and he would just hide behind the doors. My house was completely shot at. My mom lives in another area, and that's where we found refuge.
Pima County estimated 400 to 1,000 migrants with nowhere to stay could start arriving daily in Tucson beginning in April. Jan Lesher, the Pima County administrator, said the county simply cannot afford the roughly $1 million per week that previously would have been covered by federal funds.
$48 million a year is not something that can be easily absorbed into a Pima County budget, particularly in a year where we're all looking at making budget cuts. We refer to it as homelessness on steroids. We're going to take individuals who are already homeless in the community. We have that population who are houselessness, homeless in this area, and adding to that an additional 1,000 people a day.
Funding predicaments similar to Pima Counties are playing out in other border regions and faraway cities like New York City, Chicago, and Denver that have received migrants. As in Tucson, local governments anticipate that without federal dollars, communities will face significantly more migrants living on their streets, putting a greater demand on police, hospitals, and sanitation services. Congress faces a Friday deadline to fund the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which pays for migrant services along with other federal agencies. Current money could be temporarily extended as a stopgap measure to keep DHS and other federal agencies running.
Now, buying and selling homes will soon look very different under a $418 million settlement made with the National Association of Realtors. Now, a major change is the long-held 6% split between the buyers and broker and sellers brokers being cut out. The commission can be negotiated and sellers can shop around for better rates. Buyers will enter an agreement with their broker and pay directly instead of financing that commission as part of the mortgage. Commissions will no longer be disclosed on listing services either, which critics say kept commissions artificially high and led brokers to push for more expensive homes. Industry experts expect homes to be cheaper as real estate commissions come down. If a judge approves the settlement, it's expected to take effect around July. Now, there can be as many as 5 generations in the office right now, and in some cases, workplace attitudes don't align. But there are some takeaways from older workers. Here's the story.
The House, a high-profile example of 5 generations in a workplace. The silent generation, boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z.
We have more generations in the workplace than ever before because people are living and working longer.
That on its own creates workplace challenges, but multi-generation work expert Lindsay Pollack says the COVID-19 pandemic's disruptions added more layers, especially for Gen Z.
They just don't have that experience of being in some of the situations that maybe older generations might take for granted.
Amid talk of their more casual approach to interviews, even to showing up on time, career strategist Julie Bauke says Gen Z may have other priorities because they have so many career options.
So they are less likely to follow the edicts, the declarations of an employer because they see work as a collaborative experience, not as a top-down, you tell me what to do, and I do it.
While that might irk coworkers, Bauke says Gen Z workers are taking a firmer stance on work-life balance than older generations.
It appears the U.S. could be working on a spy satellite network with the help of SpaceX, according to sources who spoke to Reuters. The sources said SpaceX is building a network of hundreds of spy satellites under a classified contract with the U.S. intelligence agency, the National Reconnaissance Office. The sources explained that if this is successful, the U.S. government and military will be able to quickly spot potential targets almost anywhere in the world. In a statement, the NRO acknowledged that it's developing a sophisticated satellite system, but declined to comment on SpaceX's involvement. The sources said SpaceX's Starshield business unit signed the nearly $2 billion contract in 2021. This is separate from SpaceX's Starlink, which is working to provide internet all over the world. And an unwelcome milestone at the gas pump. Prices are higher now than they've ever been all year. According to AAA, the national average price for regular gas climbed to $3.47 a gallon on Monday. That's up from $3.45 a year ago. This is the first time since December that prices have been up on a year-over-year basis. Industry experts say while demand usually increases as the weather warms up, other factors are causing prices to skyrocket. Specifically, recent drone attacks on Russian oil refineries and refinery outages as well caused by extreme cold over the winter. Apple is in talks to build Google's Gemini artificial intelligence engine into the iPhone. Bloomberg News reported on Monday, citing people familiar with the situation. Take a look at this.
Apple's iPhone could be getting a Google AI upgrade. Bloomberg reported on Monday the two tech giants are in talks to build Google's artificial intelligence engine Gemini into the iPhone. Citing people familiar with the situation, the report said Apple's upcoming iPhone software update is set to include new capabilities based on its own AI models, but that the company is seeking a partner to power generative AI features, including functions for creating images and writing essays based on simple prompts. The two parties are still discussing terms of the partnership, and Bloomberg added it was unlikely that any deal would be announced until Apple's annual Worldwide Developers Conference in June. The world's biggest phone maker has also held discussions with Microsoft-backed OpenAI and considered using its model, according to the report. Apple, Google, and OpenAI did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment outside business hours. Apple has been slower in rolling out generative AI than rivals Microsoft and Google, which are already weaving them into products. Last month, Apple CEO Tim Cook said the company will disclose more about its future plans for generative AI later this year, adding that the company is investing, quote, significantly in the area.
And Shell weakened its 2030 carbon reduction target and scrapped a 2035 objective, citing expectations for strong gas demand and uncertainty in the energy transition, even as it affirmed a plan to cut emissions to net zero by 2050. Take a look at this report.
Energy giant Shell scaled back climate targets on Thursday. It weakened its carbon reduction target for 2030 and cancelled an objective set for 2035. CEO Wael Sawan told Reuters this was because the outlook for the global energy transition was still uncertain. He further said trying to be forensic about Shell's emissions in 2035 was perilous. But the firm stuck to its plan to cut emissions to net zero by 2050. The changes are a key part of Sawan's strategy revamp to boost returns. He wants to focus on higher margin projects, steady oil output, and growth in the production of natural gas. Rival BP made a similar move last year when it pulled back on oil production and emission reduction targets. The companies have faced growing investor pressure to boost returns. Shell said it will target a 15 to 20% reduction in net carbon intensity of its energy products by 2030 compared with 2016 intensity levels. It had previously aimed for a 20% cut. Shell said it believed gas and liquefied natural gas will play a critical role in the energy transition and sees it replacing more polluting carbon in power plants. Shell also maintained its target to halve emissions from its own operations by 2030.
Unilever plans to spin off its ice cream unit, home to popular brands like Magnum and Ben & Jerry's, into a standalone business, as the consumer goods group announced a new cost savings program on Tuesday. And this program would cut 7,500 jobs. Take a look at this.
Major job cuts and a big divestiture is on the way for the maker of Ben & Jerry's and Magnum. Unilever announced Tuesday it plans to spin off its ice cream unit into a standalone business. The consumer goods giant also revealed a new cost savings program that would cut 7,500 jobs. Unilever said the spin-off will begin immediately and expected to complete by the end of next year. The company said it aims to deliver mid-single-digit underlying sales growth and modest margin improvement after the split. Unilever launched a program expected to deliver total cost savings of around $869 million over the next 3 years. The proposed changes would impact around 7,500 mostly office-based roles globally. Total restructuring costs are now anticipated to be around 1.2% of its turnover during the period. In October, CEO Heinz Schumacher laid out plans to simplify the business as he admitted Unilever had underperformed in recent years. Schumacher had earlier said the company would focus on 30 key brands which account for 70% of its sales. He also aimed to work on improving its gross margin and not undertake any major or transformational acquisitions. Investors liked what they heard on Tuesday and shares jumped over 5% before scaling back.
And that is all for today's NTD Business. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.